It's February 2021, and you're watching The Lookout, a production of the Division of World Languages and Cultural Studies here at Minot State University. I'm your host, Samuel Stinson. On board today, we have our quizmaster, Eric Furuseth, and also our co-host, Robert Kibler, on board. We also have a treat today in that we have Joe Davis, MSU alum, here to talk with us in just a few minutes. But we're going to start things off this episode with our quiz. So, quizmaster Eric Furuseth, please take us away.
Well, thank you very much, Samuel. Yes, this year, Valentine's Day and President's Day came back to back. And so I thought that would be the appropriate subject matter for us as I pursued some interesting trivia questions to consider. Now, I will put out these questions, and then audience members can email me the answers. And if you get all three answers right, I will be buying a slice of pizza for you at Spicy Pie. So that would go to my email at Minot State, eric.furuseth@minotstateu.edu. The first question is, many of our presidents are very well known because the president and the first lady have both become famous and have contributed so much together and so on. Which is the longest married couple of any of our presidents and their first ladies?
The longest married couple.
The longest married couple. And if you guys are interested in making a guess, I will entertain your guesses, but I will not reveal the answer.
Does it matter if they're dead?
It does not matter.
Mostly dead, I should think.
The vast majority of them are dead.
Thanks for the process of elimination. That helps.
First lady could be alive or they could be dead. No? Sam, what do you think?
Eric,
No?
I think you're frozen on the screen. Is it just me, or Eric, are you frozen?
I'm frozen on my screen too.
It's just you, Sam, I think.
No, I'm frozen.
Yeah.
I'm frozen.
Okay, does it have anything to do with hope? Like Arkansas, hope.
I'm not answering. I'm not giving you hits.
Like couple that I do know, I think about George and Martha, right? But they were the first, doesn't mean they're the oldest. So I don't even know. I was just
Okay.
Yeah, well, I know she was already married before.
Oh, she
Martha
was.
Washington, Martha Custis was married before, so that would cut into the time that she and George could have been married.
Mm-hmm.
But Jimmy and Rosemary, I think they've been at it a long time. But I don't venture a guess.
Is that your answer, Jimmy and Rosemary?
I'm not guessing because I don't.
Jimmy,
there's an audience out there who needs to really consider this broadly.
I'm going to guess Dwight Eisenhower. I don't know why. It's just on the tip of my tongue. I'll just throw it out there. Dwight Eisenhower.
What, Mamie Eisenhower? Yes, they certainly had a long marriage.
He died relatively young from a heart attack, didn't he?
Hmm.
I'm just trying to cut down on find the span.
That's
think
true.
Yes.
So the like two couples in the running, one who's got it and one edged out.
One who had it up until recently. I'll put it that way. All right, let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay. This one is a more straightforward. Harry Truman is a favorite president of many people of both parties. He was a straight talker. He was someone who led us through the period after the assassination of Franklin Roosevelt. And his beloved wife, who he was a childhood sweetheart with and high school sweethearts with, but did not actually marry her until they were in their mid-30s. But they did have a very long marriage, of course, for the rest of their lengthy lives. It wasn't the longest. what was Harry Truman's wife's first name?
Yeah, not exactly.
I was thinking Lady Bird, but that's Lady Bird Johnson.
That's
Lady Bird
Lady Bird Johnson. This woman was, who knows what hand she was. Okay, well, I will leave that question out there.
Bonnie.
The first name, either the original name or the nickname, the famous nickname. Finally,
Can you give us a hint? Just a letter?
no hints. Here comes question number 3. Question number 3. We've all heard of Babe Ruth and the candy bar Baby Ruth, which supposedly was not named after Babe Ruth, even though it came out at the same time, but was actually named after the daughter, the infant daughter of this president. The question I wrote down, I wish I had the log over here. Baby Ruth was born in the interim when this president was not president. Baby Ruth was born in the interim period when this president was not president. That is my clever clue.
I think I know who it is, but I can't say it.
I think didn't Taft serve twice with a gap between?
No, he did not.
He did not.
He served once, but the interesting thing about Taft is that Taft is the only president who served as president and then later served as Chief Justice.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. So not going to be him.
I was thinking John Quincy Adams, who went back to Congress after serving, right?
He served in Congress after being president. I think he's the only president who did that. And Taft was the only one who went on the Supreme Court.
So I think I've got a good clue on this one. If I'm right, I could be wrong.
Yes.
I think that if the person guesses it, it would be the only president who has served one term and then had a gap and then came back, but they're the only one that ever happened to so far.
You would be very wise if you followed that line of thinking.
Okay.
Very wise indeed. Okay, we can leave it at that.
All right.
Grover.
You gave a good clue to our audience.
Probably too good a clue, probably. I'm sorry.
No, I was hoping that people would follow that line of reasoning. So I guess that ends our Valentine's Day, President's Day dual trivia quiz.
All right. Happy Valentine's Day / President's Day, everybody. Eric, you may want to take an opportunity to rejoin since it shows you as a blank square now. You want to try to reconnect real quick before we jump back? Here we go.
Since we're waiting for him, who do you think the president is?
Is it Cleveland?
Because they taught us the president's song when I was in school, and it was like, yeah.
Shout out to Animaniacs.
Exactly. Gotta love some Animaniacs. Welcome back. Today we're happy to be speaking with MSU alum Joe Davis. Joe is a nationally touring artist, educator, and speaker based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He employs poetry, music, theater, and dance to shape culture. Joe's work has been featured on BET, CNN, and VH1. He's the founder and director of multimedia production company, The New Renaissance, the frontman of emerging soul funk band, The Poetic Diaspora, and co-creator of Just Move, racial justice education through art. Joe has keynoted, facilitated conversation, and served as teaching artist at hundreds of high schools and universities, including programs in New York, Boston, and most recently as the artist in resident at Luther Seminary, where he earned a master's in theology of the arts. Joe Davis, welcome to the program today.
Hey, thank you. Grateful to be here.
All right, Joe, I understand that you grew up around this area in the Midwest. So I'm going to ask, what was that like, and how is this different from where you're living and working now?
Yeah, I mean, it was cool growing up in Minot, North Dakota. You know, they say, why not Minot? Freezing's the reason. So, you know, it was always cold, but it's still cold over here in Minneapolis too. So nothing too much to complain about. I knew everybody growing up in Minot, North Dakota. My family was stationed in the Air Force Base out there. And so I was on the Air Force Base when I was a kid, and then moved off the base and been all around the country as well throughout my life because I have family all over the place. But landed here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I've kind of started to replant some roots. Been here like close to a decade now, and even looking at possibly moving from being a renter to purchasing a home. I don't know, we'll see. But I love it out here just because as an artist, this is a beautiful, bustling artist community that I'm really connected with. And there's always something to do. I used to do a lot of concerts and theater productions pre-COVID. And so even with the pandemic, I'm able to stay connected and do stuff virtually. So yeah, I'm grateful for that, for the artist scene that's out here. But I still have family and friends back in Minot, North Dakota as well.
So Joe, I'm going to ask about your work in poetry. So here's how I've written the question. Why poetry? In your opinion, what does poetry do for us in times like those that we're living in now?
Yeah. So for me, I've always been a poet. Even when I was a little kid, I joke about writing these little love letters to my schoolyard crush to sneak kiss behind the swing set, you know? And my friends would be like, ooh, you gonna get cooties. And I said, so what? I want to get cooties. And it was always really playful or really imaginative. I grew up just telling stories and creating songs and writing poetry. And I fell in love with the work of, you know, Dr. Seuss and Langston Hughes. At an early age, I found this book called Pass It On, Poems for African-American Children. I remember looking through those pages and seeing images that looked like me and looked like my sister and my mom and my dad. And I saw myself reflected in those paintings and even in those words. So at a very young age, I was really drawn to just this art of being creative with language, right? But as I got older, I got really, really sick. I was in the hospital a lot, in and out of the hospital. I missed a lot of school. And even when I was hospitalized, I still was writing. And for me, that was therapeutic. It was an emotional outlet. It was a way for me to process my experiences. When it was hard for me to talk to my parents or my friends, I could just pour my heart and my soul into writing. And so for me, writing has always been healing and has always been transformative. And so at the time when I was younger, I didn't realize how instrumental it was to me becoming who I was becoming. But in retrospect, looking back, I can see how it was definitively shaping my identity and my connection with the world and with those around me. So that's why I'm a big advocate of poetry, because I know what it's done for me, how transformative and healing and empowering it's been for me. And I've seen it do the same thing for other people. So that's why I like to build community around writing, build community around creative expression, because I know that can be really empowering and really liberating for people, to open them up to new ways of being, to open them up to new possibilities, right? That's what poetry is all about. That's why I'm passionate about it.
So that's probably a good segue for me to ask you also. I've heard about your work with fellow MSU alum Angie Edison, an ELA teacher at Magic City. You two have collaborated on the annual Team Poetry Slam. Could you talk about how that all got started, and could you tell us a little bit more about the event?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Angelina Edison. She was one of my favorite high school teachers. A lot of people don't know I used to be kind of shy and quiet, and I'm still somewhat of a introvert some days. I'm more of an ambivert because, I go on that spectrum. But, people see me as a performer, right? As this performance artist. But when I was in high school, it was teachers like Mrs. Edison who really helped me more deeply explore that part of myself that wanted to express, right, openly and publicly. And so I always just give her a big shout out, right? You always got those great teachers who see the potential in a student and want to encourage that and help foster that. She was one of those teachers in my life. And so even after graduating, we just stayed connected. And I remember like getting involved in a lot of poetry slams. There were a couple that I did in Minot, but I did a lot more like here in the Twin Cities. And I was like, man, this is such an amazing venue, such an amazing space where people of all backgrounds can just express themselves and speak their truth and share their story. I was like, I wish I had something like this when I was younger, when I was in high school, right? And so we, Mrs. Edison and I were talking about that. And I was like, you know what? We should totally do a poetry slam in Minot and get the kids involved. I can come and do a creative writing and performance workshop and work with them, and they can share their own original work. And so that's what we did. We started it, I believe it's like 8 years ago now. We've been doing it for like 8 years consecutively. I haven't missed a year. Even last year, we ended up doing it online. And so, yeah, so many of the students have come and said, thank you so much for holding that space for us and showing us that our voices matter, that people in the community have come out and said, you know, that they value what these students are sharing, because they're our future, right? They're the leaders of the future. Yeah. And to hear from them, to not only hear their voice, but to honor and affirm it and say, yes, like we appreciate what you have to say. That's a really beautiful thing. So I'm grateful we've been able to create that space together.
You know, Joe, I since we're on the topic here, and you mentioned Mrs. Edison at Magic City as an influence. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, you could have been the oddball in your family, creative and poetizing from birth, but you know, mostly people have others who have influenced them too growing up. And I wonder, did your family provide you like a good venue for your creative outlets, and who else in the community early on sort of got you going? And I want to take this moment just to say how excited I am to have you on here, and a person who's left us many years ago, really, and gone on to do terrific things. So we can brag about you all the time. So who else is part of that community, that early part?
Yeah, I would definitely have to shout out my big sister. She's 7 years older than me, and she would always babysit me when my parents were working or when they were out or whatever. And her and I, we got in all sorts of mischief together. Like she would be trying to think of ways to keep me entertained and amused, right? But we would end up just doing just the weirdest things. We would mix up these crazy concoctions in the kitchen, stuff you shouldn't mix together, and try to force each other to eat it or to drink it. And we would, she drew as well. She was a visual artist. And so she would create these like cartoons and coloring books that I would draw with her or color with her. And we would even like draw on each other, like make these little tattoos. And we played make-believe. We would just make up stories and become characters. And so I just remember spending hours and hours and hours with my big sister in this world of imagination. So yeah, I got a shout out to her for fostering that creativity for sure. Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit before we started the program. You've been moving around a little bit since your time at MSU, right? And you're most recently in Minneapolis. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences and the places you've been?
Yeah, so my mom's from Jamaica, Montego Bay, Jamaica. So I've had the chance to go there a few years ago. That was a really amazing experience to be out there for a couple of weeks after having just heard stories about it, and then actually going to see, you know, the home that my mother grew up in, and to eat fresh coconuts off the tree. And like, that was just phenomenal experience. I actually want to go back someday. If I, you know, my future children, I would want them to have that same experience. But yeah, I've been all over the country with my parents being in the Air Force. We have family all over. We've just been, you know, traveled extensively, but, I've been in Minneapolis for like 7-8 years now. And prior to moving here, I was in New York for summer 2013 as part of a residency with other artists. And so, you know, I say I went from the Big Apple to the Minneapolis, but I like it here in the Twin Cities. It's like a little big city, you know, like it's still pretty tight knit. It's you know, the more you move around, the more you get to know people. And I feel like I know most of the artists, and I feel like there's kind of like this sustainable community ecosystem of support in the arts here. I've collaborated with a lot of artists musically and in theater. And I feel like folks are just looking out for each other here, you know, especially as artists in the gig economy, right? Where it's how unpredictable and unstable that can be at times. But thanks to the community, I've been able to be a full-time artist. And so that's one of my favorite things about the cities here is just that sense of connectiveness, particularly among the artist community.
I have a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
I didn't know that your mother was Jamaican. Maybe you mentioned this before, but I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
I have actually two questions, kind of from extremes of your life. Did you grow up with a lot of reggae and other traditional folk music of Jamaica and that kind of thing? I mean, reggae was so big for a while, probably when you were young. But
Yeah.
you know, so that
Mom,
the
yeah,
rhythm
I
of
would say my
reggae,
mom would.
or the style of reggae, or the kind of rebellion in I think of Bob Marley, of course, of some certain amount of rebellion. So thoughts about reggae?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my mom would tell me stories about, you know, Bob Marley and the Wailers. And I'm a huge fan of Bob Marley. I don't know if folks can see. He's in the back of my case, on my phone case here. He's actually one of my favorite artists, mostly because of just his fearlessness and like just speaking truth, but also speaking truth with such passion and conviction and love, right? And he was such a poet. He was a poet of the people. He was a folk artist, right? And reggae really is a folk music, a music of the people. And so I like to just study artists like Bob Marley, and just I'm a big fan of folks who are in of the people and who like speak just that, like speak to the roots, you know, speak to the core, to the soul about like transformation and healing. And that's what Bob Marley was all about. And so I love reggae so much. And when I went to Jamaica, you just like that energy, as soon as I stepped out the plane, you could almost feel it. It was palpable. That reggae vibe, right? Those good vibrations they talk about.
Right. So at the other end of the spectrum, you went to Luther Seminary. You know, I happen to be a Lutheran myself. I mean, this Lutheranism of mine must have worn off on you a little bit growing up here. You were the artist in residence, but you apparently also took classes to get your master's degree.
Yeah, I know. I definitely blame a lot of folks in Minot for me stumbling into the Lutheran world.
Yeah.
I grew up in like the Black church, kind of a Kojic Pentecostal vibe with the Hammond B3 organ and the tambourine and the old church mothers with the hats, like shouting and singing.
Yeah.
And so I very much carried forward that vibrant, fervent spirit,
Right.
in my theology. But I had some mentors who just so happened to be Lutheran, and I was rocking with them, right? And so now I jokingly say that I'm Luther Costal. Because sometimes you gotta be contemplative and you know just sit and bask in that, in the liturgical music, right? But then every now and then you gotta shout amen. You feel me? Like I gotta have both. I gotta have both in my world. But yeah, it was kind of unique. I never would have expected in a million bajillion years that I would wind up in seminary. That was not in my game plan. But yeah, again, just people in my life who saw something in me. They said, hey, you would make a great candidate for the artist in residency here at Luther Seminary. And if you are accepted, you can also get a full ride tuition, and you can study whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. And so I was like, maybe I'll give it a try. And I applied and went through the whole process. Lo and behold, unexpectedly, I got accepted. And so, but then looking back, I'm like, okay, yeah, I was where I needed to be. I learned so much. It really shaped me. And I had some great opportunities just to try different things. And they let me do music and poetry in the institution. And I brought what I call freedom funk to Luther Seminary. And so that's like my band and we play music about freedom, right? But we always got to keep it funky. And so, yeah, I got to do some
things up there, I'm sure.
Yeah. It was a good time. I don't think Luther ever saw as many people dancing in chapel as they did when we came.
That's great. Joe, I think maybe this is an appropriate time to ask this question, because you won't remember, but way back when you were here, I gave you the book award for most promise going forward. And I remember I really admired you as a poet then. But if I had to have one point of criticism, I felt you were just a little too sunny or optimistic as a poet. And, since then, of course, you've got this degree in theology, and you've gone on, and we're Facebook friends. So I know that optimism is still a part of your sort of aesthetic vision. But, as the world complicates around you, I guess I would ask you to speak to, your poetic vision and how you are able to deal with more mature, complicated issues. I mean, George Floyd came up, and, your poem just got published in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune on Black Lives Matter. These are issues that don't necessarily have all sunny sides to them. So where is your aesthetic in dealing with this more complicated stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I'm now like deepening that presence in holding the space for the complexity of human emotion, right? We can't have joy. We can't fully experience the authenticity of joy unless we also are allowing the space for that heartbreak and sorrow, right? And so I study notes from like, Nina Simone, who would say the point of an artist is to speak to the times. Like, why be an artist if you're not going to speak to the times, right? And so when we talk about the police murder of George Floyd and the uprisings that occurred here in the Twin Cities, like I feel a certain obligation and responsibility to speak to the truth of what I experienced during that time. And it wasn't joy, right? There's a lot of, there's trauma and there's woundedness. And those types of things need to be expressed, because otherwise we're not going to find the joy and the healing that we long to have unless we face, what really is. And so I'm really big on that. And I never lose sight of hope. But in the words of Dr. Cornel West, he says he's not big on having hope. He's big on being hope, because having hope is too spectorial. But being hope, you got to embody that. You got to practice that. You got to stay committed to that and be persistent even through the heartbreak and despair, right? And so I try to be present to the realities in which we live, and also create space to cultivate the world we long to live into, which I think is a world of hope. So
that's a great quote.
Yeah.
What feedback, could you talk a little bit about that long poem that was published in the Star-Tribune, and what kind of feedback or response you got to it from the community?
Yeah, that was really overwhelming. I didn't expect that to be published in the Star-Tribune. I didn't even know about it until the morning that it happened. And someone had texted me and said, "Hey, I saw your face in the Star-Tribune alongside this poem." And I was like, what are you talking about? And then I go online and I found it. And then I had other people kind of messaging me throughout the day. And that was an honor to see that. And I had a lot of folks just really grateful for those words that I wrote. And what I wrote, it's a piece called Raise Up. And it was really speaking to just what it means to feel oppressed and to feel beaten down, but to also know that the only way to raise up is alongside other people. There's who is it that talks about they tried to crush us, but they didn't know we were seeds. I'm trying to remember who that is. That's a poet who says that as well. But that's kind of the image that I held in my mind as I'm writing this piece. And I think that I truly believe that the only way that I can rise, like I only rise as high as I lift someone else up, right? And that's the only way we're going to get through these hard times that we're going through, when there's, whether it's a global pandemic or racial violence or socioeconomic inequities, whatever it is, the only way we're really going to make it through is together, right? We have to raise up together. I know that I'm just one voice of the collective many. And so when I was writing that poem, I was trying to like help people see that more clearly, that they're not alone. I think that poetry can make us feel less alone and more alive. And so what I hope to impart with that piece was to say, hey, like I felt this, perhaps you felt this too, but we can stay connected and we can raise up together.
I like using the word raise instead of rise there, as you explained it, because rise, yes, I can rise up on my own, but raise is the process of lifting someone else or something else. Yes.
Absolutely. Yep. And that was intentional.
Yeah.
And it seems along the same line that you see yourself as a social poet, as somebody who's here to be like in the public square with a voice, not like a dark, dead in the streets poet sort of. And the two, there's quite a bit of them as well. So could you talk a little bit about your process? Is it an interior process that results in some external product, or is it just all seamless for you?
It's different with each poem, but largely the writing process is really meditative for me. It has a lot to do with my attentiveness to listening to my own body and what am I carrying and what am I experiencing, but also listening to the community and trying to pay attention to the voices that aren't being heard, like who's being overlooked, who's being invisibled, right? And how can I make the invisible visible? How can I make the unconscious conscious? And so to me, it's always about that attentiveness. It's a practice that I try to develop every day and deepen every day. I write every single day, whether that's, I may not write a complete poem or a complete song, but I'm always just processing and practicing every day. And I'm also highly collaborative. I love working with other writers and other musicians because I know that my vision is incomplete. I don't have the full vision unless someone else can contribute. And so I want to listen to what other people are saying and see what other people are doing. And then together we can create something even bigger than what I initially imagined. And so whenever I get the opportunity to work with other artists, I really enjoy doing that as well.
Joe, I'd like to ask a question. With respect to young writers and young artists, what kind of advice would you give them as they're starting out right now in the moment that we're in now?
Yeah, I would say read everything you possibly can, especially, writers that you admire, writers that you respect, writers you want to be like. Just read their work, study their work, and just write as much as possible. Like you have to study the craft and try to master the craft and never be satisfied. Always be critical, always ask questions, right? And I'll also say connect to community. I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for teachers and mentors and friends who pushed me and challenged me. And so you can't do this alone, in isolation. Some people think I'm just going to become this brilliant genius writer, just cooped up in my dark apartment and come up with this masterful work. And maybe that happens somewhere. I haven't seen that happen, because even the great writers that we see have emerged are emerging from being in conversation with other literature and other writers, right? And so practice the craft as much as possible and get connected to others who are also practicing the craft. So iron sharpens iron.
Well, I'm kind of excited that, as you get more famous as time goes on, we can count on that little clip of you that we can run in Hartnett Hall saying, Joe Davis said, read as much as you can. Read.
Right.
Because we'll be pushing that message here too.
Absolutely. All right, Joe Davis, we know you have to go, but thank you so much again for helping us out today and being on the program and sharing your craft, sharing your process, and sharing your philosophy. We really appreciate it. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It's great.
Thanks so much. It's been great.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we've reached that point in the program again. Again, it's episode 14 here of the Lookout Podcast. Thank you so much for staying with us over the last year and into 2021. Again, we're going to say this, contact us, let us know when you can be on the program. We're interested in featuring you and your work and your scholarship and your interests. So you here in the MSU community, please be in contact with us, with Robert Kibler and with me, Samuel Stinson, and with everyone else associated with the podcast. We'd love to have you on the show. We're going to close things out now here, our first episode of this year. As we always do, this is Minot State University. Be seen, be heard, and be inspired. And thanks for watching.